We are at the eastern end of Dean Street at the intersection with Young Street. In this video we will be looking at development at this end of Dean Street from Olive Street through to Young Street. After the first European settlers arrived in the district that would become Albury, growth radiated out from the crossing place. The crossing place was at the western end of Hume Street across the Murray River. Townsend Street was for sometimes Albury's main street, and by the mid-1800s the corner of Hume and Townsend Street had become more or less the business centre of town. But South Albury was part of the Murray River floodplain, and after several floods the growth of Albury moved north and east. The commercial centre of Albury started to shift to the western end of Dean Street by the latter decades of the 19th century. However, until well into the 20th century, most of the Dean Street allotments from east of Olive Street were either residential or they were vacant land. The arrival of rail in 1881 brought activity to this end of town, including 3 hotels within easy walking distance of the Albury railway station. But there was little other business activity at this end of town. A Border Morning Mail reporter wrote in July 1953, "Dean Street East has a new look. Without watching carefully, one part of a town or city is likely to grow without notice, and when, after a few years, it is noticed, people gasp and ask, how did it happen?" Such a parallel could almost be drawn between the far eastern end of Dean Street and any other given area in Albury. One does not have to be much more than 20 years old to remember when, from the Colonial Mutual Life Insurance building, few of the present shops existed. The journalist continued, "Indeed, it is less than 30 years since that few hundred yards consisted of houses and vacant allotments only." So that was in 1953, when most readers would have been old enough to confirm the accuracy of the article. Then from around 1920 through to the mid-20th century, rapid growth took place at the eastern end of the main street. There was a significant increase in value of property as new commercial projects progressed. Before looking at development at this end of town, a brief look at the numbering system for properties in Albury. A decision was made in the 1920s that numbering should be standardised. It was decided that numbering should start from the centre of town. The Municipal Council chose the Union Bank on the north-east corner of Olive and Dean Streets as a starting point from which other properties should be numbered. The Union Bank was numbered 500. The numbers on allotments then ran from 500 ascending or upwards going to the north, and from 500 descending going to the south. Numbers ran from 500 ascending to the west and descending to the east. Even numbers are on properties on the north side of streets and on the east side of streets. Odd numbers are on properties on the south side of streets and on the west side of streets. Having cleared that up, we will return to the corner of Dean and Young Streets. For about 80 years, Young Street was part of the Sydney Road through Albury. In 1928, the Sydney Road was renamed the Hume Highway. Until about 1960, southbound traffic on the highway turned right here before travelling most of the length of Dean Street, then turning left into Townsend Street. From 1931, a bridge known locally as the Overhead Bridge crossed the rail tracks here to give access to East Albury. Prior to 1931, there was no safe and convenient way to cross the tracks at the end of Dean Street without going 2 blocks further north of here to Wilson Street. Up until 1887, Sydney Road into Albury from the north entered Albury via Wilson Street. When rail arrived in 1881, the railway tracks were crossed at Wilson Street, and a gatekeeper was employed here to close gates across the street every time a train came through. Then in 1887, a bridge over the tracks was opened on Guinea Street, another block further north, and the route of the Sydney Road was changed to cross the railway line there at Guinea Street. Development of East Albury was hampered by the lack of a rail crossing at this end of Dean Street. From the 1890s, locals made numerous approaches to the New South Wales Chief Commissioner of Railways to have a bridge built across the tracks to East Albury from Dean Street. In the mid-1920s, the then Chief Commissioner of Railways agreed to have the bridge constructed as long as Albury paid half the cost. It took almost 40 years of effort before a tender for construction was at last awarded in October 1930, and the bridge was completed the following year. The overhead bridge opened up East Albury for development and remained in place until the construction of the Hume Freeway through Albury, completed in 2007. The Harold Mair footbridge, crossing the rail yards and the Hume Freeway, is in roughly the same position as the old overhead bridge. Travelling west from the eastern end of Dean Street, I'll be using notes prepared by Albury and District Historical Society member Ray Gear. Ray looked at properties of 1915 along the full length of Dean Street. I was also assisted by the memories of Joe Adams. Joe's family owned several properties at this end of town and still owned business premises between Macaulay Street and David Street. I will start by looking at properties from Young Street along the south side of Dean Street. I will then return to the eastern end and repeat the process on the north side of Dean Street. The Terminus Hotel was built in 1881, at the same time as Albury's railway station was being built. It was said to be built using bricks left over from, or deemed not suitable for, the station building. Robert Doughty was granted a licence for the hotel in February 1881 and remained as licensee for almost 30 years. Originally single-storied, a second story was added in 1926, designed by prominent Albury architect Lewis Harrison. The hotel then included 36 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, large sleep-outs, and 8 lock-up garages. Many would remember the hotel as the Termo, rejuvenated in the 1980s under new owners Tom Doolan and Wayne Reed. Ed Malouf purchased the hotel in late 2004. On January 12, 2005, the Termo was totally gutted by fire and Albury lost a significant heritage-listed building. In 2025, a liquor store occupies the site. We then crossed COD Lane. In 1915, between the lane and Macaulay Street, there were vacant allotments and at least 2 private homes. COD, the Committee of Direction of Fruit Marketing, was a Queensland-owned business that came to Albury in 1946 and established in Young Street. As the business expanded, they moved to new Dean Street premises in 1952. The COD was a grower to retailer organisation selling farmers' produce direct to retailers. Fruit and vegetables came from all over mainland Australia, from Tasmania and from New Zealand, to be handled at the Albury Centre. After the business closed, the restructured premises became home to Gold Key Furniture in 1976 and later Captain Snooze Bedroom Furnishings, and in 2025 it is home to Sports Power and Trek Bikes. The home of the German-born retired baker Fridolin Sig occupied the eastern corner with Macaulay Street in 1915. The building that occupies that site now was built in the late 1950s. Downstairs was the premises of AG Healing Limited, automotive spare parts. Upstairs was the studio and auditorium of Radio 2AY. Many would remember the children's hour on Saturday mornings. The upstairs auditorium would fill with children. The more confident kids would take the microphone to perform live to air. Across Macaulay Street in 1915 was an Adams family home. Joseph Adams was born in 1841 in Eversberg in Westphalia, Germany. He qualified as a carpenter and cabinet maker in Essen before migrating to Australia, arriving in Albury in 1868. The following year he married Mary Eva Schubach, a member of one of the pioneer German families of Albury. Adams and his descendants were involved in the construction of many homes and business premises in Albury, and also establishing as undertakers. Joseph Adams passed the business on in 1898 to his sons Joseph Simon Adams and Henry Adams, and he retired to his home Eversberg on Pools Hill. This land was later donated to the Mercy Nuns for the Mercy Hospital. The house just visible on the left of this photo was a family home. Next door at 443 Dean was the business premises of J.S. Adams and Sons, undertakers. Adams family members posed for a photo in front of the premises: Henry, John William and Joseph Simon Adams. In 2025, the Adams family still owns the premises occupied by Thick as Thieves Cafe, Anthony's Shoe Repairs and Takeo Bill's restaurant. This photo shows one of the Adams men, probably Joseph Simon Adams, on his horse-drawn hearse conducting the 1903 funeral of Peter Malavi at Albury's Pioneer Cemetery. The Adams family built several other stores in this block, up as far as the big store on the David Street corner. These stores have since changed ownership more than once. On the corner of David Street, where Lighting Bonanza stands in 2025, was the big store, built in 1912 by Betro Abacare. Before Betro owned the site, the furniture and mattress making factory of Thomas Delaney was there. Delaney was in business on this corner for about 20 years, later moving to Keywash Street south of Dean Street. Betro Abacare was to own 3 of the corner sites at this intersection: the northwest and northeast, which we will return to later, and the southeast corner, where he built his big store in 1912. Betro was awarded one of the first blue plaques to be awarded in New South Wales. The plaque was unveiled in November 2022 by member for Albury Justin Clancy and representing the Lebanese community Tim Farah. A Syrian-Lebanese immigrant, Abacare was recognised for making a major contribution to the development of Albury's commercial centre. The plaque also recognises the contributions from the rest of the local Syrian-Lebanese community to retail business in Albury, especially at this end of Dean Street. Betro arrived in Australia in 1889, and by 1898 he had established a successful draper's business in Townsend Street. In 1912, he erected this building, known both as the Big Store and the Australian Building. The magnificent Regent Theatre that Abacare had built on the opposite corner opened in 1927. We will return to that later. Both of these buildings remain to this day as Albury landmarks. Betro's family home was just around the corner in David Street, and the twin gables of that house are still visible behind the shop front. Ray Geer noted that in 1915 there was a vacant lot on the southwest corner of Dean and David Streets. In the early 1930s, Norman Harbright opened a grocery store on this corner. In 1944, he sold the business to W. Wainwright. Florence Pharmacy opened on the corner in September 1953. In 2025, Zambrero Restaurant occupies the corner site. Next door at number 465 Dean is a two-storey dental surgery and residence. This distinctive building was erected for and occupied by Charles Pettit. Pettit established in Albury in 1889. The practice still survives in Albury. After changing both practitioners and location several times, the practice now operates from Smollett Street premises. Charles Pettit left Albury in late 1908. Continuing west in 1915, we passed several homes, including the homes and surgery of three of the town's medical practitioners, Dr. Muller, Dr. Duncan, and Dr. Cleaver Woods. After the surgery of Charles Pettit, we come to more buildings owned and operated by members of the Lebanese community. At 471 Dean was the drapery and dressmaking store of Salimi Nazir. With signage, "All You Desire of Nazir," the photo is of Tufi Nazir in his delivery van in about 1930. Salimi Nazir's daughter Mary married Carl Farrer, and by midway through the 20th century, Farrer's store occupied 471 Dean Street. A couple of doors further on at 475 Dean was the drapery store of Neef and Jamili Assad. The Abacare buildings at 477 to 479 Dean Street were built in the mid to late 1920s for Antonia, known as A.M. Abacare. A.M. is first recorded as a hawker and then becomes a draper and importer of goods. Upstairs, the buildings became the A.M. Abacare warehouse, where women of the family made clothing and organised goods for the hawkers to sell. A 6-roomed brick residence stood where Californian Eatery is in 2025, just west of the lane. We come now to the corner of Dean and Olive Streets. In 1915, the large single-storied Daniels building with the drapery store of Alexander Daniel was on the corner. He had moved his business from across the road, which we'll revisit later. This corner was then commonly known as Daniel's Corner. There is much to see in this photo. The unsealed road with a gas-lit street light in the centre of the road, the dress of the lady with her dog about 10 or 12 metres in front, the horse-drawn cab, and Tom Ryan's Market Hotel on the opposite corner. The Daniels building contained a number of shops not dissimilar to those in the Colonial Mutual Insurance building, the CML, that replaced it in 1925. Among the occupants were Bauquet's refreshment rooms, Mrs. Hicken, a restaurateur, Alfred Metcalf, a hairdresser, David Nathan, a furniture salesman, and Alfred Putt Tick, a tailor. Prior to Daniel's building, the bakery of Fridolin Sig occupied this corner site. Sig, a native of Germany, had been an Albury baker since at least 1882. The Colonial Mutual Life Insurance, CML, office block and clock tower opened in October 1925, and the building was extended to its present size in 1938. Space in the building has been occupied by a large number of businesses over the years. Occupying the store on the corner in 2025 is Coronet Jewellers. In 1952, the firm was started across the road in Olive Street by Vince Harangozo, an immigrant from Hungary after World War II. The store shifted to the CML building in the mid-1960s. Paul Harangozo took over the business from his father in 1999. In mid-2025, Paul Harangozo announced that after 73 years, the business will close permanently at the end of October 2025. We return now to the Young Street end of Dean Street to walk up its north side. As we look at the north side of the street, I will continue to refer to Ray Gear's article describing the Dean Street of 1915 and rely on the memory of Joe Adams. I'll also be referring to detail that comes from a talk given by Yvette Naziah McNeil at the September 2024 meeting of Albury and District Historical Society. On the corner in 1915 was the business of McCulloch Carrying Company. As well as the carrying business, McCulloch's sold farm produce such as chaff, lucerne, hay, potatoes, oats and barley. McCulloch's had operated in Albury since the early 1900s. Their premises were destroyed by fire in July 1933. The site was offered for sale by auction in November 1935. The company continued in Albury into the 1950s, having moved their premises to 644 Dean at the other end of the main street. Beaurepaire's tyre service moved to this corner site in October 1947. The new premises were opened by Mayor Cleaver Bunton and Sir Frank Beaurepaire. Beaurepaire's had previously operated from the northwest corner of Dean and David Streets. Further west at 428 Dean was a vacant block in 1915, owned by the Permure and Wright Company. They had arrived in Albury in the 1880s. The company had started as a carrying company and by 1888 had 48 agencies across New South Wales and Victoria. Later, Permure and Wright became general merchants. On their Dean Street site, they opened a new modern department store in November 1954. We can still see their sign. In 2005, Dan Murphy's liquor store occupies this site. We cross Spencer Street. In 1915, between here and Macaulay Street, there were several homes, including an Adams family home on the Macaulay Street corner. On the opposite corner in 1915 was a vacant block at number 440. Charles Thiel built his bakery on that allotment in the mid-1920s. Don Felton operated his chemist store within that building from 1948. In 2025, there is a second-hand bookstore on the same site. Next door at 446 Dean was a family home in 1915. It was demolished for the Red Cross Hall, which opened in August 1953. Somewhere within this block was the meeting room of the Independent Order of Oddfellows, an international, non-sectarian, non-political organisation established to help people in need. In 1915, the rest of the allotments to David Street were vacant. In 1950, Bert Seaton Motors opened at 448 to 450 Dean Street. He continued in business well into the 1960s. Beyond the car yard was Rupert Hines Butchery. These properties, back as far as the Thiels building on the Macaulay Street corner, were later demolished to make way for expansion of the Regent Cinema complex. And so we arrive at the beautiful Regent Theatre. In the Border Morning Mail of October 1953, Bill Delaney was describing what he could remember of the Dean Street of his youth. He wrote, There was a swamp where the Regent Theatre is, and it was a favourite resort for our geese and those of others living around the area. Betro Abacare commissioned Albury architect Lewis Harrison to design the original building. When opened in early 1927, the theatre was described as the pride of Albury. It was said to be the first theatre in Australia built primarily for motion pictures and described as the finest theatre in Australia outside the capital cities. The theatre was run by the Hoyts Theatre Group and capable of seating around 1,400 patrons. In 2025, the Regent Cinema Centre contains 9 cinemas, including the Heritage listed theatre from 1927. On the ground floor, there were several shops, and in 1938, Croft's grocery store opened on the David Street corner and was still there well into the 1950s. We now cross David Street. Betro Abacare also owned the land on the northwest corner. Beaurepaire's tyre service opened on this site in the mid-1930s before moving east to their new premises on the corner of Young Street. City Autoport opened on this corner in December 1951. The site remained in auto servicing until about 1970. T&P Motors operating from this corner until they moved to Wagga Road in Lavington. In 2025, a jeweller occupies this corner site. As we move further west on the north side of Dean Street, the significant contribution to retail business of the Lebanese merchants of Albury becomes more apparent. Lebanese families had business premises along both sides of this section of Dean Street. The family names include Naziah, Buckley, Farah, Corbin, Assad, Abacare, Haddad, Malouf and Diehood. At 466 Dean Street was the ladies' fashion business of Tufi and Fautine Naziah, established in 1928. Next door was Hanson's Chemist at 468 Dean, taken over by Herbert Rowe in 1938. Australia House at 470 was another fashion shop, this one run by Adele and Wadia Buckley. It also became established in 1928. Farah House was at 472 Dean. It was established in 1930. Carl and Mary Farah had a women's fashion store in this building. Next door at 474 Dean, Werhard and Amelia Corbin established the Corbin Building in 1931. In October 1933, Mrs. E. Riddington advertised that she wishes to announce that she has taken over the Wildflower Cafe at 474 Dean Street that was recently conducted by Miss Vincent and solicits a share of patronage. Good 3-course dinners available for 1 shilling and 6pence, poultry and fish every Friday. Warwick Cakes opened in the building in March 1938 and remained as tenants for many years. The Bended Elbow is at 480 Dean Street in 2025. Joseph Diehood built the block on a vacant allotment at this location, opening in March 1930. The building included 6 shops. They were fronting Dean Street and along the adjoining Ritz Arcade. Upstairs was a large dance hall, originally known as the Casino Ballroom, but better known later as the Ritz. The Ritz hosted many weddings, dances, balls, and other community gatherings. The block was sold to Norman Jacobs in 1934. George Malouf started business as the Busy Drapers in Olive Street in the early 1900s. In October 1910, he moved to 482 Dean Street. After Malouf moved his business west in Dean Street, The Busy Drapers was purchased by Joseph Dyehood in February 1924. That site is home to the Commonwealth Bank in 2025. Where the Green Zebra is in 2025, Alfred Wood and John Wood opened a new dental clinic in September 1909 next to the Busy Draper. And next to them was another dentist, George Edwards. We will stop here for a moment to use this nice image to get a broader look at this section of the north side of the street. We can date this photo reasonably well. The Regent Theatre looks complete, so the photo was taken after 1927. There is no overhead bridge crossing the railway line, so it's pre-1931. Joseph Dyehood has not yet built the block, so that makes it pre-March 1930. So it's a late 1920s photo. Next to Joseph Dyehood's drapery store is Wood's dental practice. Since December 1914, Willie Chong had been advertising his Canton Cafe as the finest cafe in Albury, specialising in confectionery, fruit and ice creams. R.G. Foley arrived in July 1918 as Steam Vulcanisers, advertising that they are prepared to repair all makes of tyres. There is very little development of East Albury in the background. At the Young Street end of Dean Street, McCulloch's Carrying Company is still intact, and the 1926 second story has been put on the Terminus Hotel. There are still several vacant allotments on Dean Street, especially east of David Street. Well before the previous photo was taken, we come to a 19th century single-storied building owned by Alexander Daniel, divided into two shops. Daniel later extended the building to 2 stories before moving to a larger store across the road. Daniel's drapery store occupied one of the shops, and Treloar's Cafe restaurant served diners next door. In 1915, William Oakley's 2-story photographic studio was a prominent building on Dean Street. Oakley, born in London, had arrived in Albury in 1894. He built the 2-story Oakley Studios, and it opened for business in 1904 on this site. Oakley sold the building in 1922, and after other photographers occupied the studio, in 1942, Jack Dellinger leased the studio. By August 1948, he had adopted the name Photo Supplies as a department of Oakley Studios. He purchased the freehold of the building in 1956, and not long after his son John entered the business. Jack Dellinger died in 2001, leaving an incredible collection of photographs, valuable both for their artistic merit and their immense social and historical significance. The Dellinger family continues in the building in 2025 as Photo Supplies Camera House. We reach the final building on the block. The Union Bank building on the corner of Dean and Olive Streets opened in April 1907. It later became the ANZ Bank, then Angus and Robertson's bookstore. In 2025, it is the WAW Bank. And so we arrive at Olive Street and the end of our tour of the eastern end of Dean Street. Dean Street, once part of the main arterial road linking Australia's 2 largest cities, has long been the centre of activity in Albury. The western few blocks of the street have been the focus of cultural activity, business, hospitality and entertainment. Slow to develop, the eastern end can now be considered just as significant as the rest of Dean Street. Buildings of cultural and historical importance are alive and well at this end of the street. This video recognises some of the men and women who played their role in developing this part of the city of Albury. I hope this short tour helps to encourage the preservation of our rich heritage and history. Thank you for watching and listening through to the end, and hope that you have enjoyed the tour. If so, please tick the like button on YouTube so that your friends and contacts might find the video. And if you feel inspired, you might also like to leave a comment.